Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another edition of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you, as always, by the GSMC Sports Network. My name is Christopher Shepard. Thank you guys yet again for tuning in. We have a fantastic show ahead for you guys today. A really special show, in my humble opinion, where every single segment is concerning the world of college football. To start off, we look at some Week 1 betting odds and some of the biggest games to start off the year. And then we have some special segments where we dive into certain teams and their win projections as well to see if they can overperform or to see if they will underperform. And I think that overall, this is going to be a great look into college football as the season is rapidly approaching. But before we get to any of that, I want to remind you to like, follow, and subscribe to not only the show but the network. It is greatly appreciated by all. Do also consider, if you do feel so inclined, leaving a tip or donation at the link gsmc.cloud. It is a huge support to both me and my fellow podcasters and ultimately the network as a whole. You can also leave any burning questions, comments, or concerns you have about the show, and they will be addressed and answered at the beginning of the next episode. Without further ado, let us get right into the show and right into the start of the college football season. We'll be looking at a Week 1 betting odds for some of the biggest games. We don't necessarily have that many big games to start off the year, but we have 3 in particular that I'm kind of keeping my eye on to see where certain teams are at. Some contenders, some teams with new head coaches, and some breaking in new players. It's a nice little amalgamation to start off the year, so to speak. A lot of teams trying to cement themselves in the race for the CFP. And let us start off with one of the games that I believe will tell different stories for both of these different teams right here. Clemson versus Georgia. Georgia is minus 135. The over-under is 47.5. And Georgia's money line is minus 600. And so, what I mean when I say that the tale of the tape is that these two teams have very disparate stories. You start off with Clemson. Clemson, program historically known for breaking in quarterbacks. However, over the past couple of years, they've kind of failed to do so. We see DJ Uiagalelei leave for Oregon State. He's now at Florida State now. And now they're heavily reliant on Cade Klubnik. Can he be the man to take them back to high heights like they were in the Trevor Lawrence and Deshaun Watson eras? Now, when I look at Clemson, I can't all blame it on Klubnik either. Some of it has to go to Swinney and the way he's kind of fallen behind in recruiting. He's not necessarily gotten high-profile wide receivers to help Klubnik, and I'm also blaming the wide receivers. No one has truly stepped up to be a wide receiver one for Clemson. And so Cade Klubnik has had a rocky start to his career, not just due to himself, but others around him. This Clemson program is really in jeopardy of losing its luster that it's gained over the past decade or so. And when I look at this roster, you lose a lot. You lost Bo Collins, we'll talk about later. He's now in Notre Dame. And so you don't necessarily have guys who, in my humble opinion, would start on many rosters in the top 15 teams in the nation. And this definitely looks like a very daunting test going against Georgia, albeit at home. Whereas Georgia, they certainly have a lot more questions than, say, last year, when they had guys like Bowers, guys like McConkey, Rosemi Jack-Saint was a deep threat. They certainly have questions now as to who's going to emerge as their wide receiver one. Is it going to be Dominic Lovett? Is it going to be Rara Thomas? Or is it going to be even one of the tight ends that they have, Delp or Yarosek? But they do have the fact of the matter being a quarterback. Carson Beck is a steady, metronomic presence. He may not be the sexiest quarterback in terms of throwing the ball deep as other teams have in the top 25 or thereabouts, but he gets the job done and he does it well. He's consistent and he knows what he wants. And so I definitely feel like this game is going to be a Georgia win. However, I'm going to take the under here. And the reason being, both of these teams might struggle a little bit. Even Georgia. I think that, breaking in a new wide receiver core for a guy like Carson Beck, who's only had 1 year, with such a solid group of weapons at his disposal, it might be a bit challenging. But he does have Delp and Yurosek at his disposal, and Dominic Lovett and Rara Thomas have been with Georgia for quite some time, so they will know the system, and I think that this will be ultimately an easy win, maybe not as high scoring as people think. Let's move on to the next game. Notre Dame versus A&M. Two very similar teams, in my opinion. You have Notre Dame, third year of the Marcus Freeman regime, cycling through quarterbacks, land on Riley Leonard, who, while has been one of the more serviceable QBs in college football in recent past, has dealt with injuries, obviously last year against Notre Dame, suffering a thigh injury that kept him out all of last season. So is he even up to par? Then you look at their wide receiver core, it's an amalgamation of guys like Jaden Greathouse. You have Tyler Buckner, a former QB for them, converted to wide receiver. And then you have Mitchell Evans, who portends and profiles to be a breakout star for the Notre Dame Fighting Irish at the tight end position. But it just feels like this Notre Dame team doesn't necessarily have the depth and consistency of other top 50 teams. But they have an opportunity to separate themselves from, say, the lower end of the top 25 by facing an A&M team in transition. A&M is actually favored by 1. The over-under is 49, minus 115 money line, so they expect this to be a very close game, odds makers. And I think so too, because Texas A&M is, in my humble opinion, a little behind the 8 ball when it comes to retooling their roster. At least Notre Dame has had a head coach who has had some time with these kids. A&M, pick up Mike Elko. I like the hire, but it's going to take some time. I like Connor Wegman. I think that he's the quarterback that Texas A&M needs in terms of stability and longevity. He's had decent stretches when he did play last year, just under 1,000 yards. But at the end of the day, I'm looking at Mike Elko to immediately put a stamp on his identity. A lot of the recruits that Jimbo brought in, attempting to rebuild Texas A&M into one of those recruiting factories where it sees results on the field, needs to kind of transition to finding players who will stick with the culture that Mike Elko wants to build there. Not just high-end recruits who might just transfer after a couple of seasons if they don't necessarily want to follow the Elko plan. And so this just is a weird game to gauge. I would say the slight edge lays with Notre Dame here. Obviously, Riley Leonard might take a while to get going. Who knows how hard this injury is impacting him. But at the end of the day, the bottom line is transitioning from a guy who had such heavy control over the recruiting process, wanting to turn Texas A&M into a factory where it just cranks out high-end players, to a guy that's going to focus more on a culture of stability, certainly seems like it could fracture some of the relationships that are already in the Texas A&M locker room. There's a lot of more tension coming from A&M than I feel from Notre Dame. That being said, A&M at home, I think, can pull out a win. Kyle Field is one of the greatest environments in college football, as we all know. So it could be that home advantage that sees A&M over the hump. But I just think Notre Dame has that little bit more stability to their squad. And that's what I'm looking for in these two close-to-call games. And then let's finish with a battle of new quarterbacks who impress in small sample sizes. LSU and USC. Obviously, let's start off with LSU. Garrett Nussmeier, the ReliaQuest Bowl last year. 300 yards, 2 touchdowns. Had a couple mistakes, but proving that he can stay in this LSU system that requires him to throw the ball early and often and for that matter, far downfield. Whereas USC, a little bit of panic set in. Who is going to be the successor to the great Caleb Williams? Miller Moss stepped up. Fantastic bowl game as well. However, in this game, LSU is favored by 6. Over-under is 62.5, a lot higher than other totals. And the LSU money line is minus 205. And this is much more close to call than, say, Notre Dame versus A&M. Because these are two quarterbacks who aren't used to being in starting roles. This is the first full season we'll see of both Nussmeier and Moss. Both of these guys, younger guys. Miller Moss more so. But it's all going to come down to, I believe, the coaching. Which philosophy works best with their new QB? Lincoln Riley, obviously, known for building up quarterbacks. He did it with Baker. He did it with Kyler. He did it with Caleb. But not necessarily preaching defensive identity. Whereas Brian Kelly, with Jaden Daniels, really opened up and varied this LSU attack, making it a more vertical threat down the football field. Now the question comes down to, what are both QBs comfortable with? I feel that Miller Moss might actually be the more comfortable in terms of downfield passing than Garrett Nussmeier. I feel like Garrett Nussmeier is a much more anticipatory QB. I feel like he's going to pick and choose his spots. And this game is going to become one of those tactical battles that we rarely often see at LSU. How they pick their poison offensively. How they find the weak spots in the teams. That being said, I feel like LSU has a slight advantage because USC's defense might be a bit weaker than the LSU defense. And I feel that way because, talk about Lincoln Riley. Yes, you can bring as much offensive culture and build up as many quarterbacks as you can, but at the end of the day, you need an offensive identity. And LSU has some of the better defensive players in all of college football. Harold Perkins is an absolute stud at outside linebacker. And so, I just feel that right now, LSU, even though they might not have the better quarterback on paper at the very least, definitely feel like the better team. And they can pull out a win. I'm taking the over here. I think it will become a track meet. USC will stay in the game, but then they'll fade away and say the late third quarter, early fourth. That will just about do it for that week 1 preview in terms of betting odds for college football. I'm excited for the start of the season. Hope you guys are too. Coming next, we're going to switch to win projection previews for some teams, starting off with a team just recently moving to the Big Ten. Will they have troubles in their first year there? We're going to have to find out after the break.
I feel like I'm losing my